Welcome to Wordplays. My name is Kate Dudding. I'm one of the producers. And today we have 8 stories about magic, all kinds of magic. To link the stories together, I asked each of our tellers, if your story was a kind of light, what would it be? And I got 8 completely different answers. Okay, I'm just looking through my script and Claire covered the next section. So W.B. Yeats said, "The world is full of magic things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper." So perhaps some of these stories will help you perceive magic in your world. Our first teller is Fran Combs-Berger from Castleton-on-Hudson. She's going to share with us a Romanian gypsy folk tale called The Magic Box. And when I asked her, what kind of light is your story like? She said, the light from fireflies. Welcome, Fran Berger.
Kate, nice to be here, everybody. So this story is a very old Romanian gypsy folktale, and it's titled The Magic Box. Long ago, there lived a gypsy couple, in love, young, and newly married. Now they lived out from a village where the pine forest meets the beech wood near a stream. And this is where they summered, and they lived in spring, and in the fall and in the winter, they lived up the hill in an old abandoned mill, which they tightened and made as warm as they could. And their first few years, they were very, very happy. The husband collected firewood and did work and odd jobs for villagers all around in the area. And the wife, she made amulets that she made by collecting beech nuts in the beech wood and making a hole in them and then stringing through with horsehair. And then she spoke her words of charm into them and sold them in the villages. And she made potions for people and did some healings for people. And so they made not a huge living, but enough to be comfortable and be happy in those first few years of marriage, until one day she was out in the beech wood, this young woman, collecting and muttering to herself, oh, if we could only have a child. For 2 years it had been, and there was no child coming. Oh, look, there are ants. And indeed, there was a line of ants with little tiny white bundles on their backs. Oh, look how beautiful they are. They carry their babies with them. And a tear rolled down her cheek. And then she heard the call and looked up, and there indeed was a chaffinch guarding her nest. Oh, look at this. Even the birds are blessed with babies. She guards her eggs so she has her babies. I have no baby. And she dropped her beech nuts and wept into her hands. And then she heard, child, stop your weeping. She looked up and was wiping her eyes with her apron, and she looked around, and there before her, in front of a huge beech tree, at the very front of it, an opening occurred, and there appeared a beautiful face, though very old, wrinkled like a walnut, with brown skin and sharp, piercing black eyes and silvery black hair that flowed like a river down her back. There was an old woman staring into her face, and she leaned forward from the tree to say, come to me, and I will tell you how to have this child you so desire. Oh, what should I do, old mother? What should I do? Just do as I say. Take this first. And she handed her a small box. Hold it while I talk to you. I want you to go into the village on the next full moon. Find the biggest, roundest, most perfect pumpkin and buy it. Trade it for your amulets. Trade then for some goat's milk. You come home, you scoop the pumpkin out. You put the goat's milk in, you drink it, all but enough to share with your husband. And then you lie together, and 9 months hence you will have a bouncing baby boy. Oh, oh, thank you, Mother. What do I do with this box? You save this box for your child. You give it to him when he is grown and ready to leave. It will bring him good fortune. Remember this. Oh, thank you. She put her hands up before her head and bowed. And when she stood up, the tree had closed over, and the old woman was gone with just a whisper saying, I am Matuja, the spirit of the beech tree. And then there was silence. She gathered her wits about her and she gathered more beech nuts and she hummed as she worked. And she was so excited that she fairly ran home at the end of the day and told her husband in the tent that night all that had been said and all that happened. Oh, they hugged one another and breathed such a sigh of relief, and they could barely wait the 2.5 weeks till the full moon that came next. And upon the morning of that full moon, the young woman hurried into the village with a whole armful of amulets, which she traded for the very best pumpkin and the very best goat milk she could get, and still had enough left over to get bread and a few other things. And home she ran. And she waited and waited the day until it was time for her husband to come. And she had that pumpkin carved out and she poured that goat's milk in and drank everything down to what he needed to drink. And he drank down to the last drop. And then they had a wonderful night together. And true to her word, 9 months hence, there came a beautiful, bouncing baby boy. They were so blessed and so excited that in the tradition of their people, they took him down to the creek to baptize him by holding him by his little heel and dunking him in. But before they did that, they had to give him a name, and they looked at each other and they gave the agreed name, Baktalo. Baktalo, meaning happy one. And they dropped him down into the stream and caught him in a warm, fuzzy blanket and carried him back and nursed him back to warmth in their little tent. Oh, they were so excited. This was wonderful. Their dreams had come true. They had a beautiful baby boy, and happy he was every moment of his life, which he spent mostly out in the woods with his mother or with his father and among the animals with whom he had special relationship. He could understand the speech of all that walked or slithered on the ground, and all that flew in the air, and all that swam in the waters. Baktalo was blessed as well as happy. And many, many friends did he have, though few of them were two-footed. They lived a very happy life for a number of years. And as Baktalo grew strong and into his teen years, he helped his father more and indeed his mother. And life prospered. They were very happy until a drought hit the country. And people were no longer able to afford that which they did not absolutely have to have. Something that we understand now and to a degree are experiencing. And so it was very hard to sell enough amulets, and people didn't need as much done by other people. And things began to be very tight at home. It was very, very difficult to provide enough just for the three of them. Baktalo by now had become quite strong, and he was in his late teens, and he decided the best thing he could do for his parents was to go out on his adventure to find out who he was and what he'd be doing in the world. And Baktalo sat and talked to his parents and said, it is my time to go, my time to become a full man in this world. I will be back. I will help you. But first I must go on my own adventure. Well, his mother and father, being gypsies that they were, knew full well he spoke the truth. And so his mother said, wait, son, just a few days while we prepare enough food and supplies for you. And I have something I've waited to give you all your life. And under a pile of blankets, she pulled out this beautiful little beechwood box. given to her so long ago by Matuja, spirit of the beechwood tree. And she related to her son the story of how he actually came to be. He was amazed, and he took the box and he looked at it and he said, "What good is this box, mother? It's just a little box. There's nothing in it. It's just keep it, my son. Matuja said it would bring you great fortune. Please, please keep it to you, close to you." "Ah, I will, mother." And he tucked it into his pack and forgot immediately about it. He was very excited to be on his way. And southward he started his journey the very next morning. He met many, many friends, foxes and squirrels and deer and birds of every kind. Even the crows were his friends, and they're not friends to many. So on he went southward, and one night he camped in the wood with his old friend Badger. "Oh, well, hello there, Bucktallow. It's so nice to see you," said Badger, who over the years had grown really quite old. He used a stick to walk along and said, "Oh, Bucktallow, I have great news for you now that you're out on your adventure at last." "Well, what is it, old friend?" "Oh, well, hand me that cup of tea, please." And he drank his tea. "Ah, that's better. I have heard that if you continue south 1 league, that's where the king of the enchanted forest has set up his whole camp and his whole retinue, and he is offering the hand of his very daughter and half his kingdom to the young man who can show him that which has, oh, just a minute, has never been heard or seen before." "Oh," said Bucktallow, "truly, how long ago did you hear this? Do we have time to get there?" "Oh, settle down, young friend, and finish your dinner. You can leave in the morning and be there in plenty of time. The word is nobody's given the king what he wants yet." "Oh, I will be the one," said Bucktallow. "Well, of course you will. That's just because I'm too old to get there ahead of you." They laughed at this and they finished their meal. And Bucktallow was up in the morning early to go. He stopped patiently and had his cup of tea from his friend Badger, bade him farewell, and headed south as fast as he could. Now, for a young man in his shape, he could have made it, well, I guess, in a day and a half. But he made it in a day and a quarter. He was very, very excited to get there. And he had many friends along the way to teach him the shortcuts. So it was dusk as he came into the meadow that was in the middle of the forest. And there, indeed, oh, what a beautiful encampment. It was a red velvet tent that the king had, the king of the enchanted forest. And it was so beautiful, he stopped just for a moment to take it all in and to look around. And then he straightened himself and dusted himself off, and he walked right up to the guard and said, "I am Bucktallow. I have come to show the king that which has never been seen nor heard before." And the guard looked him up and down and said, "Very well, young man, but you may not enter this evening. The king is done seeing people." "What do you mean? I have traveled long." "Oh, everyone has traveled long. Everyone has traveled far. But it is eventide, and this is when the king listens to the whispers of the enchanted forest. This is where he gets his information and his very nurture. You are not to disturb him." Well, Bucktallow stepped back and took a deep breath. This was very hard for an impatient young man, but he strode off toward a stream he saw. And as he was walking, he heard the tinkle of laughter, and he looked around and looked back, because there was bathing the most beautiful young girl he had ever seen. In fact, the only one he'd ever seen bathing. And she had beautiful raven black hair and gorgeous deep brown eyes and such a laughter. It meant she had a beautiful voice. And he scurried quickly on so he wouldn't be taken as some kind of spying person. And he made his camp talking to himself. Perhaps that was the princess. If that was the princess indeed, I must win. I must do what the king wants done. I pray you, friends, come give me all the secrets you can while I think about what to do and say. And though his squirrel friends and many birds came over to speak with him, none of them could think of anything particularly new. So the next morning he woke up. He breakfasted and splashed his face in the stream, and then he came back to the tent of the king. I am Batalo. I have come to tell the king that which has never been seen nor heard before, so that I may win the hand of the princess. And half the kingdom, I dare say, said the guard. Go ahead, enter in. There are 3 ahead of you. Batalo waited patiently, surprised that others had come quite so early. The king was getting frustrated by the time they got to Batalo. And Batalo said, good day, my king. Good day, young man, said the king rather brusquely. I have come to tell you that which has never been seen or heard before. Only tell me where to start and where to find it. The king looked at him and said, surely you jest. You're asking me to tell you where to look or what to say? I'm the one who's asked the question. Guards, get this insolent man out of here. Toss him under the oak. What? Batalo yelled as he was being dragged backwards. And indeed, the guards dragged him all across the meadow to a large oak with a huge boulder in front of it, which several of them pulled back, and they threw him in under there. And there underneath was a damp cave-like area that was completely dark. Once they rolled that rock, that big stone, back over it, Batalo sat down. This is what becomes of one like me. My name is Happy One. I'm the one to do this. Oh, curses. Oh, the sound of the little moles came around him. It's cold in here, Batalo. We'll come and we'll cuddle around you. We'll keep you warm. And they filled his lap. And they climbed next to his legs and they snuggled in to keep him warm. Oh, my friends, I am so glad to see you. But I am so distraught. Wait a moment. And he thought about the box that would bring him good fortune. He dragged it out of his pack and he said, you box, do something. And the box didn't do anything. Box, you're supposed to bring me my good fortune. And he threw it into his lap. He says, this is no good fortune for a man like me. When all of a sudden he noticed this greenish light glowing in front of him. Then it became somewhat yellowish, and then it became whiter. Then it became bright, and it outlined a beautiful old woman with a wizened face, nut brown, with fierce black eyes and gray silver black hair that ran down her back like a river. I am Matuja. I am the spirit of the beechwood tree. And I came to your mother all these years ago to help her have you and to tell her to give you this box. Now hand it over to me. Yes, Matuja, he said, handing her the box and bowing his head in fright. Matuja took the box and she ran her hand in circles above it, and a hole appeared in it. You see this? I do. And then she said, hand me your staff. And he handed her his staff. And she took that staff and she plucked several of her very beautiful hairs. And she strung that staff to that box and strung her hairs up and down the length of that staff. And then she took a stick of her own and she ran it across those hairs. And as she did so, music came out of that hole she had made. And it was so sad that the moles began to weep next to Batalo, and tears ran down his own face. And then she sped the music up, and it became a light and beautiful sound that made them all begin to sway. And then she speeded up yet further, and Batalo found himself up and dancing, and the moles were moving around as merrily as a mole could. And of a sudden, there was light coming in through the crack where the stone was being rolled back. And Methuselah was gone, but the strange instrument had been laid in his hands. And the king's voice yelled, "Come forth, young man." And he came out and he said, "What is this that we heard? What have you done? What have you got?" "Oh, my king," bowed Bagdala, "I have brought to you that which has never been seen nor heard before." And then, mimicking what Methuselah had done, he drew the bow across the strings. And he played low and slow, and the entire retinue and the king himself flowed tears down till they begged, "Please stop." And he sped the music up, and they relaxed, and they began to sigh and to hum. And then he sped it up, and they began to dance and dance till they were all tired out. And the king said, "Come forth, young man, come to my tent." And he granted Bagdala the hand of his daughter and half his kingdom, for bringing that which had never been seen or heard to him. And messengers were sent to where the beech wood met the pine forest, and Bagdala's parents were brought, and a great feast was had, and a marriage was made. And my friends, that happiness is how the violin came to this earth.
Oh, that was great. Woo!
Thank you. That's one of my favorites.
Well, Fran, thank you very much. You certainly started us off with a magical tale and took us to Romania, where I've never been.
Well, we have Zoom now. We can go anywhere.
That's true. Our second teller this afternoon is Beverly Schwartz. She's going to tell a personal story called Teaching Outside the Box. It's a different box than Fran's box. When I asked her what kind of light her story was like, she said, a rainbow, which of course is what happens when light is reflected by moisture in the air. You get a rainbow of all different lights. So Bev, tell us more.
Well, I taught third grade in Troy, New York, and I got a memo, and the memo said that the state of New York was going to start testing either third or fourth grades on statewide using hands-on science stations. So the kids had to show what they learned in class, not just read, write, and A, B, C, D. Well, in those days, I got a book to read the kids, and I had the questions to ask, and I was given no materials to do this. What am I going to do? Well, I'm thinking about it, and every day before I left, I always made sure my windows were closed. As I was closing the window, I looked over. I was on the second floor. Now, next to me was Rensselaer Polytech Institute, a college in Troy, and it does a lot of science. I bet they have some materials that I could maybe borrow. So let me go over and see what I can find. Maybe they can even help me and teach me how to do it. So I took the curriculum with me and I walked over. And I walked in the first building I saw, and in the building there was an auditorium and there was a sign. It was like magic. Someone was over me saying, do this, do this. And it says, hands-on science today, open for everyone, all is welcome. That's me. So I walked in and I sat at the back, and there was a teacher and a demonstrator, and they were doing like all these magical things that really was science. I loved it. I said, boy, my kids would just die for this. So when it was over, I walked down and I said, I teach next door. And I said, the state is giving these tests and I don't know how to do hands-on. I don't know how to do any of these things that they'd want me to teach. And I have no materials. I need help. So they looked at me and they said, I think we can help you. Let's get a meeting together and we'll get some RPI students. That's short for the college's name. And we'll figure out something. Well, we sure did. So I sat with them and we did about 2 weeks of lessons. and said, let's see how this goes. I didn't want to commit to the whole semester. So the first day, about 12 RPI students come in, and they're carrying this big machine that was a static electricity machine.
Mhm.
Oh my, I know what's going to happen. So we're all sitting in a half a circle, and they start talking about it and say, we need someone. And how about you with the long blonde hair? Come on up. And she came up and everyone said, come on down. We always did that for things like that. So there she is standing next to this machine. And he says, it won't hurt you. All we want you to do is put your finger on the machine or your hand. So she gently put it on. Shoo! Her hair shot straight up into the air. Their eyes were wide and big, and everyone went, oh! Everyone loved it. And then they all had a chance to do it themselves. And they had a discussion on static electricity. And then they went into their groups using balloons and this and that to understand what static electricity was. Well, we did that stuff. And I had said to the RPI students, we're going to be making a book of this. When we're done, I'm going to put words on the board so they can write a composition of what they learned today while we're cleaning up and figuring out to make sure we're all set for the next time you're coming. Well, one of the RPI students says, you know, RPI has a computer room, and I can arrange for your class to go there and type their stories in, and you can insert pictures and this. I said, whoa, 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 wait. What's a computer? Remember, it's 1985. I didn't know what a computer was. And he said, oh, and he explained it to me. I said, well, what happens if it breaks? Am I responsible? You know, oh no, don't worry, it was not going to break. So the next week, besides doing all these lessons that we're going to do, we walk over to RPI, and we ended up doing it 2-3 times a week. And there we were. Every student had an RPI person sitting next to them. And within about 2-3 weeks, they knew that computer up and down, how to insert, and they loved spell check. And it was great. So that's how they started writing their books as well. So we even had other benefits we never expected. Well, we continued with a few other things that seemed like magic to the kids. They took goggles and said, you have to wear the goggles today. Move 10 more feet back. And then they took a banana out, a nail, and a piece of wood. What were they going to do? I had no idea myself. Then they said, we have some liquid nitrogen here. And it's real cold. And we're going to introduce you to space today by telling you it's colder than this liquid nitrogen. They said, who thinks this banana can take a nail and hammer it in a piece of wood? Nobody. Nobody raised their hand. They dropped the banana in the liquid nitrogen and they took it out, and it was frozen solid. And then they took the banana and they hit the nail and it went right into the wood. Oh my God. No, they sat there like they didn't know what to say. So they said, space is like this. It's real cold. If you went out of that spaceship without something on like they wear in space, you'd be a frozen banana just like that. Well, the kids loved it. So we started talking about space, where you need the 3 forms of matter. You need gas to have the sound like air for sound to occur. You know, all those big booms in all those movies? You can't hear them in real space because there's no air to travel with the sound. They gave all these facts. And then one of the kids raised his hand. I have a question. I was wondering what the kid was going to say. How do you go to the bathroom in space? Never in my life. They were engaging. They were critically thinking. Well, there's a box you sit on. And they go, and everything goes in the box. And then they press a button, and the box closes on top. Then you press the second button, and it opens to space. And just like the liquid nitrogen, it comes in, freezes everything, makes it a powder, and then you close, the box closes. Oh, but what do you do with everything when everything's done? Well, enough fits in there until we get back to Earth. It was designed that way. And we don't want to pollute space and have things like that all in the space. So we get rid of it on Earth. Very clever. So we did things like that. So the next thing we had to do was, learn about, the rockets and planets and stars. We went on a trip to RPI where they had a real telescope. The roof opened up, and it was that time of year where you could see Mars. And you saw a red ball going across the screen. The parents came, everyone, it was 35 degrees below zero that night, I swear to God. And I was freezing because they were all in the museum down below, and they let 5 kids up at a time. Well, at the end, they surprised us. They bought us all rocket ships to build. And we built the rocket ships. We had the books done, and we invited the principal and the other 3rd grade classes. The principal invited the Board of Education, which I didn't know. Someone called the newspaper, someone called the TV, and all of a sudden we had a big event that was only supposed to be blasting off rocket ships. The kids were so proud. I was proud. Everyone was happy. And we gave them a party, and we read some of our books to them. And they also read some of the books in oral presentations to other classes. We really incorporated everything: reading, writing, math, science, magic. So they left, the RPI students, and the kids turned around, said to me, "So who are you having, when we come back in January?" I hadn't planned that far. I didn't think I was going to invite anybody else. So I said, let me think about it over Christmas. We're going to do the human body. Well, I thought outside of the box the first time. I knew I could do it again. And I said, where would I go? Well, I'll call the dean of the Albany Medical School where they teach students how to be doctors. Maybe I can get their students to come into my room. And I did. And the dean answers, and he goes, "Oh, I can help you, no problem." So we started it again. We met, we figured everything out because they had to do community hour service to graduate. So they were looking for things like this. The first day they come in, they bring a real skeleton and real bones. Oh my goodness, this is going to be fun. And during the time they were there, they brought in telescopes, to listen to your heart, the blood pressure. They brought in models of, all different types of organs. They talked about good health and nutrition. They did everything. But the kids were having trouble learning the medical names for bones. So what did we do? I said, I have an idea. Everyone get into a circle. Medical students, kids, put your hands down. I said, we just learned about the patella. That's the kneecap. You know what we're going to do? Watch. You put the right patella in, put the right patella down, put the right patella in, and shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey. And they loved it. For the rest of the time they were there, that's how the kids learned all the medical names for all the human body. Now we were finishing up. The last thing we were doing was going to have an eye doctor come. And this eye doctor talked to the kids. He had kids of his own, and he just really reached them and, good eye care and protection. He says, now I have a box. You're going to go back to your stations, and I'm going to pass out these gloves. And he showed them how to put it on. And he put on goggles. You're all going to get goggles. And your medical students are going to dissect a cow's eye. They should have told me. A cow's eye? And I'm saying oh no, some of these kids might not want to do, and they'll come home and complain to their parents. I had to see a cow's eye. So I said, wait a minute. Anybody who doesn't feel comfortable, you can sit over here with me. And this was the test that showed me these kids were totally engaged and really liked the hands-on. I said, okay, go to your stations if you want to. Every kid ran to their stations, and I'm sitting by myself alone. Well, it proved to me the kids really enjoyed learning like this. Now, when we said goodbye, they said, we have a surprise for you. I'm going, I've had enough surprises today, with the cow's eye. Well, we're going to pay for a school bus and bring you to Albany Med, and we're going to give you a tour. And then afterwards, we want you to do a play showing us something that you think you learned and whatever. my kids, oh, good, we'll do a play. And I'm going, oh, no, that's going to take time away from what I need to do. But we did it. We went to the hospital. We saw physical therapy. We talked to the emergency room doctors, went into an ambulance, saw where they made the food. We even went up to where they had the medical students, and we saw real organs and stuff in jars. They loved it. They were eating it up. And I was going, ugh. And then we did our play. They said, what do you want? And we said, we want gowns. We want an IV bottle. We want this. We want that. The girls were the doctors. Boys were the nurses. And then the rest were, people that helped around in an operating room and the emergency room. Well, we had it all set. And all of a sudden, people started pouring in. They had put flyers around the whole hospital. Come see a play of third graders. It was standing room only. And the kids started. Oh, we have a kid who's been hit by a car. Emergency. They check them out. Oh, we have to do surgery. We have the surgeons to come in. More girls came in as surgeons. And then they pulled a fast one on me. I knew what was happening because I knew what the play was going to be about. And the girl goes, the surgeon goes, oh no, I've just cut an artery. It's bleeding. He's bleeding out. I mean, wait a minute, this wasn't in the play. All of a sudden, I saw this girl reach underneath the sheets and squeeze something. It was a turkey baster roaster, and they had filled it with red dye and water. And it looked like the blood was going all over the place, all over them. The kids had planned this beautifully, and they got me. And then they finished the play, and we had a standing ovation. And this is what I had wanted to do with this program. Now, I created a program that was engaging. The students grew emotionally, and they grew, shall we say, intellectually, and they took the skills that they were learning and engaged it by doing it in this program. Now, in 1985, STEM didn't really exist. There was no really programs, okay, they had for this. It hadn't even been named. Myself and this other friend, I call him a friend now, but he was an RPI student at the time. We were sitting there saying, we have to think of a name, and we had named it STEM for science, technology, engineering, and math. No one had ever heard of it. But now this is an accepted program. It's all over the world. By creating this joyous classroom of engagement and fun, it created a lifetime of memories. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Beth. We've had magic in Romania. Now we've had magic in the classroom, and just full of light, full of joy and delight. Thank you, Beth. Marnie Gillard is our next teller. She's also going to tell a personal story. Dad appears at dance class. And when I asked her the question about light, she said, eternal light. Marnie, tell us more.
Oh, thank you. I first want to just say, Bev, that story is just living in me. Thank you.
Thank
you with a teacher who loves teaching so much. Well, this is actually a story about quitting teaching. In 1991, I was 40 years old, and I had fallen in love with storytelling and done it in my classroom. And I had little storytelling clubs I took on the road. I had a big idea to make a CD of life stories. I had a book inside my head, and I just couldn't do full-time teaching and full-time storytelling too. So I took a leap of faith and I dove off into the unknown. And that was 1991. Now, something that happens once you give yourself freedom and lots of new ability to choose, I wanted to go live near where my son lived in Del Mar, because he came to Schenectady on the weekends and we had wonderful time on the weekends. But I just wanted to spend his last high school years near him, where his friends could come over to my house and where I could go to his soccer games and his tennis matches, and it would only be a walking distance. And I did that. I moved to a brand new house. It was an apartment, really, but it gave me an opportunity to set up my story studio. And I had workshops there that were some that I gave. And then Doug Lipman, my coach from Boston, he came and gave some weekend workshops. It was amazing. We were having a great time. But when you jump off into the unknown, there's always some dissonance inside. And I got scared. There was a scaredy cat little girl inside me, like, didn't know if I could make it on my own. I think of Mary Tyler Moore going off to New York City, make it on my own. And I was having ups and downs of emotional experiences that were hard. So I got myself a nice therapist, and I had the freedom to go take a dance class. I could take it 3 times a week, I could take it once a week. There were a lot of different times that it was given in this wonderful studio in Albany, New York, downtown Albany. And Casey Bernstein was my teacher. And just from the moment I met her, it was like she had the feminine and the masculine all built into one. She was gorgeous. I loved watching her dance, and she made me stronger and more vital. And to this day, I still take dance, now on Zoom with Casey. Well, this one day came along. It was September now of 96. So I'd been out for a while and I'd been having lots of experiences. I'd had lots of good gigs, and I had a big new project about the power of storytelling, especially telling life stories, the way Bev just told us that great life story, but all the kinds of life stories. Because in my therapy, I was telling a lot of stories of my childhood and relationships and experiences, like going overseas as a foreign exchange student and learning about my deep self. Well, this one day I couldn't settle down. I had to clean my desk, and, I just kept distracting myself, and I really wanted to work in the project, but I couldn't get myself to work in the project. I looked down at my desk and I saw the calendar. September 30th. September 30th, 1964, 32 years earlier. My dad was in a car accident and he disappeared off the face of the earth. He had 6 kids from 2 to 16, and my mother, the wonderful, powerful, Irish American stoic woman, went, we're going to cry a little and we're going to put it behind us and we're moving on. And we did. And we did. But some of that scaredy cat inside me was really about grieving. And I'd done some grieving. I'd done actually quite a bit of grieving. But it was one of the things I knew was in the way. And I looked at the calendar and I just kind of jokingly looked up in the air and said, all right, Dad, I miss you. I know, 32 years. I still miss you. We all miss you. But get off my back. I don't want to cry anymore. I got work to do. I got a new job. I quit my old job. I got a new job. Come on, get off my back. I want to go on and have a great life ahead of me. And I've got lots of things I have to do. And I'm not going to be sitting around crying about you anymore. And I was just kind of fooling around, but still I couldn't settle down. So I gave myself a task. I went over and got a poetry book that I really love, full of many wonderful women's poems. And I opened the poetry book and I said to myself, whatever I opened it to, it's going to give me guidance and help me to focus and get going today. So I get the book, I open it, and there's the poem by Alice Walker that begins, "How I miss you, Dad." I had chills. Like, okay, I guess the universe is talking to me a little bit here. Wow. Okay. So I took my laptop over and sat on my couch, put it on my lap. And I said, all right, I'll talk to you. And I literally, it's not this laptop, but it was another. And I was just typing away and talking to him, crying, laughing, telling him stories that I had told my therapist. I just had this wonderful, wonderful hour or two, maybe even, where I just typed and cried and typed and cried. And when it was over, I felt alive. I'd cried so hard, it was like I'd pushed something out of me. And I just felt so, so alive. And I looked at the clock and I said, oh boy, I got to go to my therapist appointment and then go to dance class this afternoon. All right, bye, Dad. And I headed to downtown Albany, and I love my therapist. We actually decided to end that day. She said, Marnie, what's wrong with this picture? You're telling me all these amazing stories, and then you pay me. He was a great therapist. I said, I think something's wrong with that picture. You're right. And we'd really worked together well. So we just let it go. That was like our last session. And I still had a little time before dance, so I went over to Washington Park. It was a beautiful, beautiful September afternoon. And I had brought some of my ideas and worksheets and all kinds of stuff with me. And I was busily working and thinking things. I had a whole bunch of stuff that I planned in that one next hour. Finally, I went off to dance. Now, dance class was on the corner of Central Avenue and Lark Street. It was in a big old building. And when you went in, you had to go up the stairs, and there were these beautiful windows that were two whole sides of this old building. And the light was streaming in. Oh, this beautiful September light was streaming in. And I went in and waved to the teacher, and there were a couple of other friends that I had. And then you kind of get yourself settled to look at the mirror, and Casey's up front where she's going to lead the dancing. And I'm standing there, and I just kind of turned to the right to make sure I had enough room. And there was my dad in his gym shorts that he always wore, and his shirt with Roxborough Road Junior High on it, where he was vice principal, and he used to be the gym teacher. And I'm like, I'm Catholic, and I kind of believe in the afterlife a lot, but this was something really different. And I said, in my mind, I didn't say it out loud. He's standing there and he's smiling at me. And I go, what are you doing here? He said, well, you kind of summoned me, didn't you? And I said, did I? Ooh. And Casey started the dance class, and we're all just dancing. And she says, oh, I want to do this little step, shuffle, step. It's kind of a new, it's a little tap dance part of this song. Step, shuffle, step, give it a try. And I just burst out laughing. My dad was a tap dancer. And I'm like, wow. And Casey goes, what are you, going down memory lane, Marnie? Oh, I'll tell you about it later. And we just danced together next to each other that whole evening of dance. At one time we turned and everybody made a snake and we danced around a room. And of course I put my hands on a woman's waist, but I felt like I'm putting these hands on my dad's waist. And we danced a snake around the room, and then we switched. We all turned in the other direction. And then I really felt like, oh, those hands that are on my waist, they belong to my dad. And we're joking about stuff. He says, oh, I see you're buying your own leotards now. Now, when I was 12 years old, I was begging to have a black tank suit, a nylon tank suit. One day he came over and he says, hey, baby, look what I got for you. And he tosses it across the room and I catch it. And it's a black leotard. And it doesn't look new. Where's this from, Daddy? Oh, lost and found, but it seems like the kind of thing you could swim in. Some girl's leotard. And I threw it right back at him. And he says, yeah, you really hurt my feelings that time. I said, well, it was about time. I was 12. I was ready to talk back. And we just had so many things that in our minds we talked about. I went and got a drink at one point. It was a little water cooler, and I really needed a drink. And I was tempted. I was literally tempted to go to one of my friends, a guy who was also a therapist and a kind of a dance teacher and a thing he calls sounding. And we would do different exercises and stuff. And I wanted to tell him this was happening. And something in my brain said, don't tell a soul. Go back and get in there. This isn't going to last forever. And I went back and I said, Daddy, you see that guy over there? He's my really good friend. He's gay. And my dad said, yeah, I can tell. I said, do you know how many people in our family are gay? Like, do you know my brother, and my sister, do you know they're gay? He goes, oh yeah, we're good with it. We're good with it. No problem. I said, they could never tell Mom. They never could tell her before she died. Oh, Mom's real different in the afterlife. Don't worry about it. She's good. She's all good. She's good with all of it. No, she's different. And we just chatted. And then finally I can see like the light is leaving the room. That beautiful light that was pouring in is over. And there's these sparkling lights, like a ballroom, sort of like my sweater, just sort of the sparkles all over the room light. And the room is actually quite dark. And Casey up in the front, she turns to us and says, I'm not going to lead this dance. I want you to just dance with a relationship you've had. Take a ball of energy, so hold your hands up like a ball of energy is a relationship you've had, and dance that relationship around the world, the room. Let it teach you about that. Maybe it's somebody you love, maybe it's somebody you're mad at, maybe it's somebody you haven't seen in years, and just let yourself dance with the energy. I'm going to dance on my own too. This is our last song of the night. And I turned and I looked at him. For the first time, we were really like looking at each other, and I didn't have to worry about anybody noticing it. I knew nobody else could be noticing it but me. And he put his arms out like, want to waltz? And waltzing had been something I could do with my dad, and I loved doing with my dad. And I didn't get to do that with him at my graduations and so many, when I got married again, there were so many things we hadn't gotten to do together. And so now we just had our hands out like we were waltzing. I couldn't feel him, but I was with him, and we just danced. I remember it was an old George Michael song that was just so beautiful. And finally, it was coming to an end, the song, and we just looked at each other, and suddenly I started to cry. I hadn't even thought about being sad the whole night. But that moment was like, oh my gosh, it's gonna end. This is gonna end. And when I thought that and I started to cry a little, it was like he was gone. And I closed my eyes and I said, don't go, don't go. Just give me one more glimpse, one more glimpse. And he was back. But he couldn't talk to me. And I couldn't talk to him and have him hear me. It just, I knew it was over, but I saw him one last time. And the lights came up, the overhead lights all came up, and class was over and everybody applauds, and they thank Casey. And Don, my psychiatrist friend, and Casey were talking together up front. And I just had to tell somebody. I feel like no one will ever believe this, but I have to tell somebody that I trust. And I went up and I just told them, my dad was here. My dad was here tonight. He was here. And they both looked like, yay, baby, no problem believing that. Yeah. And I said, it's just so big. And for like a whole week, it was hard to take a shower and a lot of other things. Like, is he watching me? Is he just like always watching me? But I got the message. I got the message that he was watching me and that we were still connected in this amazing, eternal, perpetual light kind of way. And I didn't have to worry anymore about going right for everything I wanted and going after it and knowing he was at my side and my mom too. We had different relationships, the four of us, the three of us, kind of, and all my brothers and sisters. But when I walked out of class that day, I just knew my life would never be fearful in the same way again, because my dad had come to dance.
Oh, Marnie.
Wow.
Thank
I tell
you.
it a lot now. I tell it a lot. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing that deeply meaningful and personal story with us. It goes beyond magical. I don't know what the next level is.
Perpetual light.
Yeah. Thank you, Marnie.
You're a great audience.
Okay.
Well, that was a great story.
Well, I'm your next teller. I'm going to tell a story about my lifelong love affair. And when I asked myself what kind of light the story was like, I thought, because I don't come up with an answer. I just kind of decide on the question, and then I look at it just the way the rest of the tellers will look at it. Well, what are we going to do with that? And I thought, my story is like a fireworks that explodes in the sky and is just transforming. My lifelong love affair. It started long before I met my husband, and it's still going on. He knows about it. He accepts it. He's a wonderful husband, very understanding. And I'm not just saying that because he's part of the audience, but anyways. Yes, my first real memory of it, and I'm sure it started long before that, was at holidays before dinner. I would stand at the window looking out at the road, looking at all the cars going by, waiting for one particular car to stop. And when it parked out in front of our house. I waited for my grandmother to get out. I wanted to see what she was carrying. And if she was carrying that round black cake tin, I got so excited. I knew exactly what was inside. Her homemade chocolate cupcakes that were filled with whipped cream and had mocha icing on top of them.
Mwah.
Now, these somebody said, "Oh, you mean like Hostess cupcakes?" I said, "No, these were nothing like Hostess cupcakes." The chocolate cake was very nice, and she had special cupcake tins. They were smaller than our normal ones now, but they were bigger than the mini ones. They were just the right size that you could get 3 or 4 really good bites out of this cupcake. So she'd cook the cupcakes, and when they were cool, she would take one of her sharpest little paring knife and cut a cone out of the top of each one. And then take her smallest measuring spoon and scoop out some more of the cake, because you needed to have a nice big hole for the whipped cream. Not ready whip, no. Some whipped cream that she whipped with her egg beater. But you couldn't go too far because then it would leak out. So it was a delicate operation. So there was the handmade whipped cream that would go inside. And then she would take each of those cones and just trim off the top to serve as a lid above the whipped cream. And then she would cover it all over with a good amount of mocha cream icing. Oh, they had to be kept in the refrigerator, of course. And so every time I opened the refrigerator after the holiday for a few days, there was that black cake tin just filled with these scrumptious delights. So that's my first real clear memory of my love affair with chocolate. There are many episodes I could share with you. My friend Kathy Shalick made a bon mot trois chocolat. It's a Julia Child's recipe that has 3 kinds of chocolate brownie, a chocolate mousse, and a chocolate drizzle. But that was, we'd have to be doing a cooking course for me to really do justice to that. But I try to get in each mouthful some of the 3 kinds of chocolate, the brownie, the mousse, and the drizzle. And of course, whipped cream, because with all that chocolate, you need the whipped cream. But a tradition that I've done is I've made a Christmas log. It's called a bûche de Noël. I learned about it first in French club in high school. And I started making one for my family, I think when my son was a toddler. You make a jelly roll cake, a chocolate one, of course. And when you take it out of the oven, you roll it up. So it's going to have that shape. Now, in most recipes, you put whipped cream in there, but you see, for me, the only reason you have cake is to separate the layers of icing. So I put my grandmother's mocha chocolate icing on the inside of my Christmas log, and I roll it up. And then I make a regular icing, chocolate icing for the outside, because you can never have too much chocolate. But instead of vanilla, I use a slug of Grand Marnier. You know, the orange and chocolate go very nicely together. Now, to make it look like a real log, after you ice the outside of the log, you use a fork to make markings, rivulets through the icing, and then around the ends, so that like it's the rings of the tree. Oh, and again, you have to serve it with whipped cream, because with all that chocolate, you need a little break. Now, this year, I did not make a Christmas log because the 3 of us were not together. But I told our son, the first time we're together, we're going to have a Christmas log. I don't care what time of year it is. We deserve a Christmas log, and we've missed one. So I'll tell you one more relationship I've had with chocolate. It's has been sitting next to me this whole time. It's been one of my faithful companions. Every day, a delight, just like my husband, truly, but in a different way, of course. It's a handmade chocolate truffle, a handmade chocolate truffle from Krause's on Central Avenue in Colony, New York. It's dark chocolate with sea salt on the top and soft caramel on the inside.
Ah.
You got it? You see how it oozed out? Those three flavors, the chocolate and the caramel and the salt, are just exploding in my mouth right now. I buy them 2 pounds at a time, but I eat one a day. Occasionally, I've had 2, and one really bad day, I had 3. But I deserve a chocolate delight every day. I'm pretty confident that this love affair I've had with chocolate will last me the rest of my life. In fact, maybe I should be buried wearing one of my chocolate t-shirts. Maybe the one that says, "Money talks, chocolate sings." That would be good, but no, there's a better one. A day without chocolate is like, just kidding, I have no idea. No. This one is perfect. If there's no chocolate in heaven, I'm not going. My name is Kate. I am a chocoholic. Thank you.
Hello, Kate.
Okay. So I hope you found the magic, and I took us to a different realm that we've been in so far today.
Oh, wonderful.
It's time for intermission. Just a second here. And I'd just like to mention that if you care to donate to us, the suggested donation is $12. And you can donate by clicking on this link. Or you could send a check made out to Story Circle, not made out to me, made out to Story Circle, but send it to me at my address. And I believe Claire is putting this in the chat. Yes, Claire?
Yes.
Okay. And I'd like to mention that this performance will be rebroadcast on public access TV. The channel that proctors our parent organization controls, Open Stage Media and their Arts and Ed channel. And it will also be available on our website, storycircle@proctors.org. And if you go to our website, if you look at the top right corner of any page, you will see where next shows are listed. And there's one coming up on Friday, Stories Around the Steeple, and the Storytelling Night at Cafe Lena. And you can find out more by clicking on additional storytelling events. So now it's time for us to have a 4-minute intermission. Welcome to the second half of Word Plays. And our topic today is magic. Next teller is Mary Murphy from Albany. She's going to tell us a Cherokee legend that she heard told by Gail Ross. It's called Strawberries. When I asked Mary the question about light, she said, the inner light of love. Mary Murphy.
Hello, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. My story is Strawberries. A long time ago, when the earth was new, there lived the first man and the first woman. They lived together as husband and wife, and they loved each other dearly. But one day they quarreled. Later, no one even remembered what the quarrel was about, but at the time, each word spoken was so painful that they grew worse and worse and worse. They almost hated each other. And finally, the woman got up, went from her home, and walked to the east toward the rising sun. Now, her husband, he sat in the house alone. But he got lonelier and lonelier and lonelier until all of his anger fell away. And the only thing that was left was sadness and despair. And he began to cry. Now, there was a spirit in the vicinity, and that spirit, well, took pity on the man and came down and said, "Man, why are you crying?" And the man said, "My wife left me." "Why did your wife leave you?" But the man said nothing. He just hung his head. And the spirit said, "You quarreled with her." And the man nodded. "Well, would you quarrel again?" And the man said, "Never. I never want to quarrel with her again. I want to live exactly as we were, in happiness, in peace, and in love." And the spirit said, "Then I'll help you. I saw your wife walking to the east toward the rising sun. Go after her." And he jumped up. The man jumped up, and he was full of joy, and he ran as fast as he could, but he could not overtake this woman, because everybody knows that an angry woman walks fast. And so he didn't know what to do, but the spirit came with him and said, wait a minute, I'll help you. I'll go ahead and I will make her slow her steps. And the spirit went ahead of her, way ahead of her, and he looked around and he said, what can I do to make her slow her steps? And as he walked along, he saw huckleberry bushes. He saw huckleberry bushes on either side of the road. And he got an idea. He said, it's the cold time of year. There's no blossoming of any huckleberry bushes, but I have magic. And he raised his arm, and he waved his hand, and he raised his arm, and he waved his hand, and those huckleberry bushes burst into bloom and ripened into fruit. They burst into bloom and ripened into fruit. They burst into bloom and ripened into fruit. And when it was done, he stood back and waited. And sure enough, the woman came along, but she was angry still. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, and she couldn't see to the right, and she couldn't see to the left, and she saw no huckleberry bushes and no blossoming, even in this cold time of the year. He could sense the pain in her heart as she walked, and her footsteps were very fast. So the spirit wasn't done yet. He went on ahead, way ahead of the woman, and he thought, what can I do? And he thought, and he thought, and he saw the fruit trees along the side of the road, the apple, the pear, the peach, the wild cherry, the apple, the pear, the peach, the wild cherry. They were all over the place. And of course, it was the cold time of the year, and they weren't supposed to be blossoming. But he had some magic. And so he raised his arm and he waved his hand, and he raised his arm and he waved his hand, and those fruit trees burst into bloom and blossomed into fruit. They burst into bloom and ripened into fruit. They burst into bloom and ripened into fruit. They were gorgeous. All those berries and the smell of the fruit came to him. And he was sure she would stop and notice, So he stepped back and waited. But the woman came along, and she still was angry. She didn't look to the right, and she didn't look to the left. She didn't see the fruit trees. She didn't seem as though she smelled the fruit trees. There was pain in her eyes and pain in her heart, and she walked very, very fast. And now the spirit felt he was being challenged, and he had to do better. He had to make her stop. So he went way ahead of her again, and he looked all around, and he thought, 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 and he thought. And he said, I will create a brand new fruit, one that has never been seen on the earth before. And I will put it low on the ground, so she'll have to look down to see it. And he waved his arms and he waved his hands, and a carpet of green formed along the path as far as the eye could see. And as he watched, white flowers came up from those green leaves. And from those flowers came a red fruit. A fruit the color and shape of the human heart. And the smell, the aroma of that fruit was delicious. And he, the spirit, was satisfied, and he stepped back to wait. And the woman came along, and she was walking very fast. And she was walking on the green carpet of leaves and the white flowers and the fruit. And as she walked, she crushed that fruit. And when she did, the smell came up to her nose. It was a delicious aroma that she'd never smelled before. And so she stopped. And she looked down. And then she picked the berry and she ate it. And it was as sweet as love itself. And she began eating berries and eating berries. She couldn't stop herself. And she stood there to do it. And then she heard someone coming up behind her, and she looked, and it was her husband. And when she saw him, all the anger in her heart fell away. And she saw nothing but the man she loved and wanted to love again and spend her life with. And so she picked up a fruit and she gave it to him, and he ate it. And they both began eating fruit until they were full. And they went home and they lived their lives as they were before, in happiness, in love, and in peace. And that is why berries to this day, strawberries, brought peace to men and women. And that's why, to this day, strawberries are called the berries of love. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for bringing us a traditional tale that tells us why strawberries were created. And if you haven't had an appetite, I think by the end of today, you'll be ready to eat something of strawberries or chocolate. I think that's our last food story, a related story, but thank you so much, Mary.
You're welcome.
And Kate Danaher is in the house now. She got back from what she had to do, and she is going to tell us a story from Ireland. Kate Danaher specializes in stories from Ireland. Occasionally she has another one, but mostly it's Irish folk tales.
Yes.
With the unusual un-Irish title of The Umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
And when I asked her what kind of light pertains to this story, she said, heavenly. A heavenly umbrella?
A heavenly umbrella.
Tell us more, Kate,
There
please.
is a link. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
All right. There was a station published one time for Larry. That's when the priest comes and says mass in the house, a function going back to the penal times when there were no churches. Well, there was a station published for Larry. He was a connection of my own, a man who lived to be nearly 90 years of age, and he was never sick one day in his life, except for the day he died, of course. And I don't remember this too well myself, but the old people I heard talking, and what kept it so fresh in their memories was something comical to take place the morning of the station. Now, the parish priest we had there at the time, well, he was a trifle hasty, a little impatient, and stern of demeanor. And people were peppering in dread of him, although to go to the house, you couldn't meet a nicer person. Jeremiah Horgan was telling me he went to the house for a letter of freedom. He was marrying some bird from an outside community. As things turned out, he'd be better off if he didn't, but that's a story for another day. Well, came the morning of the station, and all the neighbors were in Larry's yard. The morning turned out wet, but country people don't mind the rain. They said it never melted anyone. Well, anyway, they weren't there long when a son of Jerry Dan Tygeens put his head round the corner and said, "He's coming." Well, all the neighbors belted into the kitchen, leaving Larry there to welcome the PP, the parish priest. And Larry, oh, he would rather any other job. He would rather be draining the Dead Sea with a silver spoon. He was very shy and distant in himself. But he didn't have long to wait when Father John came sailing into the yard, holding over his head a big black round roof on top of a walking cane. Well, Larry nearly fainted because that was the first umbrella that had been seen in that part of the country. So Larry took the horse from Father John and he put it into the shed at the side of the house. And Father John made his way into the kitchen. And when those inside saw the doorway darkening, well, they all turned around, to make themselves small behind their neighbors in case any awkward question had be put to them. And when they turned around, secondly, Father John had the umbrella open there at the butt of the kitchen, the way the rain would be running off of it, and it'd be nice and dry when he'd be going home by and by. That is when confessions would be heard, mass would be said, breakfast would be ate, and dues would be collected. Well, the morning wore on and all these things happened, and the grace of God, glory be to him, was in the house, and Father John was in the parlor having his breakfast. And Larry's wife, oh, her face is red as a coal of fire. She said, "Oh, if you saw the look he gave me when he took the top off the eggs." "Were they too done?" says Kate. "Like bullets, girl. And I wouldn't mind, but I told that daughter of mine to watch him. But there you are, the morning you want everything to go right for you. That's the morning everything to break the melt in you." Well, where were the men? They were sitting in the kitchen around the umbrella, staring at it, same as if it was a German bomber. And they said, wasn't it a great wonder? Such a simple thing that hadn't been invented sooner. How handy it would be to prop it over the mouth of a barrel, when you have a goose or a thing hatching on a wet day. Well, just then Father John came into the kitchen. "Well, man," says he, "what is the morning doing?" "Oh, 'tis clearing, Father," said one forward sort of a fellow. "Well, in that case," said Father John, "I'd best be going. I have many things to attend to." "Oh, good morning, Father," they all said, because they were very happy to have him leave because the bottle wouldn't be opened until he left. He was a strict teetotaler. Well, Larry went to the shed, to get the horse for Father John, and he was in the process. He was conveying Father John down to the main road, down through the passageway. And that is a very nice custom we do have in this part of the country. If we think very highly of you, we'll walk you down the main road, down past the gander. It can be a very cranky animal. But if we don't think so highly of you, we'll only go as far as the half door and say in our own minds, may the road rise to meet you and hit you a welt. Well, anyway, they were going down the passageway when Father John suddenly remembered his umbrella. So he turned to Larry and he said, Larry, run back to the house and fetch me my umbrella. Well, you didn't have to say this thing secondly to Larry. He ran back to the kitchen breathless. He went inside, he grabbed the umbrella by the leg, 'twas open always, and he brought it to the door behind him. But the umbrella would not go out. So then he brought it round to the front of him and he tried to push the umbrella out the front. The umbrella remained inside. He took the door off the hinges. That would give him an extra inch. But the umbrella remained inside. He looked at the neighbors looked at him, and they had pity for him. And he kept saying to himself, well, if it went in, it must go out. And the perspiration is piling on his forehead because he's thinking of the parish priest there waiting below in the passageway, and he's not there. Oh, well, there was a young kind of fella there, a simple kind of boy, and he said, I wonder if it would help it to drive out the 2 frames of the door. 2 frames of the door were driven out into the yard, but the umbrella remained inside. There's only one thing now, says Larry, knock the wall. A sledge was procured, and Father John, when he heard the banging down, below, he doubled back to the house, and when he saw what was going on, it was like a tonic to him, and he burst out into a fit of laughter, and he said, men, what are ye at? And Larry said, well, now, Father, I think if I could get that cornerstone there out, that mushroom would sail out no trouble. Father John says, move back into the kitchen for me. So all the men moved back into the kitchen, and Father John stepped inside. He took hold of the umbrella and put it before him. And now, he was a fierce big man, overcoat and all, on a wet day, so they couldn't see what was happening. And of course, he shot the umbrella like lightning, stepped outside, opened it just as fast, put it over his head, and walked down the passageway, leaving them all there speechless. And when he was gone, Larry turned to his neighbors and he said, say what ye like, they have the power. That's the story. And that's why it's heavenly. He's got the heavenly power. Yes.
Oh, thank you, Kate Danaher, taking us back to the old country, to Ireland. I'd heard that before, and so when you said that was the name of your story, I went, yes, the magic of the umbrella. Yes.
Yes, I told that. Yeah, when I first came to New York.
Yes. I think when you were on our TV show.
Yes.
We never get tired of your voice, Kate.
Yes.
Thank you, Marnie. You're sweet. You're very sweet.
I could hear those stories over and over.
Now that's a middling old story. I mean, umbrellas were probably created in the 1800s, I'm guessing.
Yes, but they hadn't seen them there yet.
Yeah, right. Oh, yes. Claire Nolan is going to take us way far back to ancient Greece. A story from Metamorphosis. I practiced that. Metamorphosis by Ovid, called The King of Thessaly. And when I asked her the light question, she said, translucent light. So things are not as they appear. Claire Nolan.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Kate, for that great story. That is truly magical. Long ago in Thessaly, there lived a king. This king ruled over this beautiful kingdom, an island country, warm and sunny, and it smelled good there too. But this king was cruel and greedy and arrogant. And in his kingdom, there was a grove that was sacred to the goddess Ceres, the goddess of abundance. And in her grove were many trees, but in the very center of the grove was an enormous oak tree, so big that 15 people could stand around it and reach out their fingertips and touch one another as they danced around this beautiful and magnificent tree as they honored their goddess. Well, this king got it into his head, this greedy, arrogant king got it into his head that this grove, these trees in this grove could be put to better use than dancing, put to better use than honoring this goddess. These trees could be cut down and sold, and therefore they would enrichen him even more, this greedy, greedy king. So one day he summoned his soldiers and the woodsmen, and they had their sharpened axes, and they processed to the grove. The people saw this procession. They didn't notice the axes. They just saw the king leading a procession of people to the grove, and they rejoiced. Why, finally, he was going to show proper worship to their goddess. So they followed him there. And when everyone was assembled, he gave the order to cut down the largest of the trees, that beautiful oak. And the people cried out, no, you can't cut down this tree. And an old woman raised her hand and said, never cut down this tree. And that king grabbed the axe and he swung it and he chopped off the woman's head. All the people were silent in horror as they watched this. And he laughed at them. He said, even if this tree were the goddess herself, I would cut it down. And he took that axe that had just killed an innocent old woman. He took that axe and he chopped it into the trunk of that oak tree. And the tree cried out. And the people cried out, and they saw the spirit of that tree leave her tree. And they saw the spirit of all the trees fly off. And then that greedy king handed the axe to one of the woodsmen and said, cut it down, cut them all down. And they had ropes ready, and they pulled and chopped that tree until finally it fell and shook the earth. And it took out scores of trees with it when it finally landed. Well, those spirits of the trees, the nymphs and the dryads, went off to find their goddess. And they told her what had happened in her grove. And she became so angry. They had never seen her this angry, not since her daughter had been taken from her, abducted from her. And she said, oh, this man, this king, this arrogant man will pay. He will pay for what he has done. And this goddess Ceres, she called out to her sister, Hunger, who lived as far away from Thessaly as you can imagine. Thessaly, with its warm, sweetly scented breezes, was so far away from the cold, barren home of Hunger. And Hunger agreed to do her sister's bidding. And that night, the king of Thessaly slept comfortably in his feather bed, and he dreamed sweet dreams. And Hunger came, and she entered the palace, and she went into his room, and she climbed on top of his chest, and she leaned her face toward his gently snoring mouth, and she planted her thin, bloodless lips on his lips, and she breathed into him. She breathed a whisper of want. She breathed a storm of hunger. She breathed a hurricane of famine into that man. And then she left. She couldn't stay there, not in this place of abundance. She went home to her barren mountain. And the king slept on. His dreams, which had been sweet, changed. They became dark, and he felt hollow. And he dreamed that he was trying to reach out for some food, but everything he tried to touch disappeared. He dreamed that anything he put into his mouth turned to ash, turned to nothing. And when he swallowed it, it entered an empty gullet. He had no food in him anymore. He was empty. And he woke up so hungry, so famished. He didn't wait to dress. He went immediately to the kitchens and he ordered his chefs, the cooks, their helpers to make him some food, anything, make me a feast. And he went into his dining room and he sat at that table, and they brought in as quickly as they could. They brought in birds that had been roasted to perfection. They brought in pies and vegetables and fruits, sweet fruits, just freshly picked. And they filled that table before him, and the table groaned with the weight of all that food. And he set to. He ate and he ate. Oh, he ate and he ate some more, and he couldn't stop eating. But as much as this man ate, he was still hungry. So hungry, famished, empty inside. He couldn't get enough to eat. He ate so much. Soon he sold everything in the palace. Soon he had to give up the palace. Soon the people got rid of him. Who was this crazed man who wanted to eat everything yet never had enough? And finally, this man who had once been a king was left with nothing. Nothing, that is, except for a daughter who deserved a much better father. And this once king looked at his daughter and he thought, I could sell her. I could sell her and get one last meal. And that's exactly what he did. He brought her to the market near the beach, near the beautiful blue ocean on that lovely island kingdom. And he sold her to the first person who offered to buy her. And he took the money and he never looked back. He went off to find one last meal. And the man who bought her bought this girl with long, straggly hair and cheap clothing. He wrapped her wrists with a rope and he pulled her behind him, and she ran as fast as she could to keep up. And she looked out. She looked out to the ocean, and she called out to Neptune, whom she had always revered. Please, please, Neptune, save me. And hearing that cry, the man who had bought her looked back. And where the girl had been, there was no one except a fisherman sitting there with his pole and his bait. And the man said, "Hey, you fisherman, where's that girl who was just here with me?" And the girl was surprised to hear herself spoken to like this, but she understood that Neptune had heard her prayer and had given her this power to change. And so she laughed and said, "There's no girl here. No one on this beach but you and me. And the man shook his head in confusion and went off. And the girl went home and told her father what had happened. And he listened. He listened with greed. He listened and he said, I see business. And each day he took his daughter to market and sold her over and over and over again. And each time the buyer would think that he had bought a horse. And when he looked back, oh, there was a butterfly flying away. Or the buyer thought that he had bought a potted plant to bring home to his wife. And when he set it down to look at something else and look back, why, there was a girl selling mushrooms in the market. And this happened over and over again. And each day he had just enough money for another meal. He sold that girl again and again, but still he was hungry. Still he wanted more. And at last, when she was not with him one day, he began to devour himself. And in a final feast, he was gone. And that's the story of the king of Thessaly and what happened to him. But what happened to his daughter, Ovid doesn't tell us.
Mm. Did I mention this was going to be a change of pace? And it did mention food, but not really in an appetizing sort of way.
Hey, it's good magic, though.
All
I
right.
happen to have,
Ah.
thank you, Kate, in the magic of Zoom.
No, mine was a dome. Yours has corners to it.
Awesome. I loved it.
Thank you.
Quite a story, Lorraine Ferguson said on chat. Yeah, that says it. Yes. Okay, now I warned Sandy about what this story was about so that he would be prepared to somehow transition us from that to the final story. I think we have still a hunger for one more story. And here's Sandy Schumann, an historical story called Following the Rolling Stones. And he said, well, of course, the light involved in this is a spotlight. And you're in it now. Take it away, Sandy.
Well, I'll tell you, I find myself in an unenviable position. You know the expression, that's a hard act to follow. Well, wow. I mean, what a great set of stories. I'm looking at all the storytellers on Zoom here. You know, why are you doing this to me? I've got to follow this act, and I want to tell you how I feel and how it makes me feel, and it brings to mind a situation. A friend of mine, Rob, says to me, "You've got to come to this concert. This is the Rolling Stones. You're going to love it." I'm not a rock and roll fan. I wasn't interested. He says, "But Sandy, this is a cultural phenomenon. You've got to see this concert. This might be the Rolling Stones' last concert. This is the end of their tour. There may never be another one." Well, I'm not really interested, but he is persistent, and finally I relent. And the tickets are more than double the cost that you'd pay for any other concert. Very expensive. Each ticket cost $10. It's 1975. And this is the Rolling Stones Tour of the Americas, their last performance in Buffalo at Rich Stadium. Now, they had already played Buffalo just a few weeks earlier at the auditorium. And I'm thinking, this promoter is crazy. Rich Stadium is so much larger. Now, okay, the tour had been in New York City and they'd played Madison Square Garden 6 times, 20,000 in each crowd, sellout crowds. That's 120,000 attendees in the course of 6 days. But that's New York City. There's 7.5 million people. We're talking about Buffalo, 400,000. How is he ever going to fill up a Rich Stadium? The promoter is crazy. Well, I go with my friend Rob. He says we should get there early. There's going to be a big crowd. And we get there quite early. And I'm amazed to see that the stadium is already half full and there's this continuous stream of people entering Rich Stadium. And the announcer says, I'd like to introduce Captain Dynamite. And this guy comes up on the stage and he's got a coffin and he's wearing a jumpsuit and he's got a helmet and he fills this coffin with dynamite and he gets himself nailed inside and boom, the coffin explodes and he gets out and he's dazed and dizzy and the crowd goes wild. You know, this is typical county fair stuff. I'm not especially impressed. And then the announcer comes on again to introduce the great Waldo Pepper. Now, 1975, the film, The Great Waldo Pepper, had come out that year. I had already seen it, starring Robert Redford, about an aerial acrobatic pilot, a barnstormer. And in the movie, this pilot, the great Waldo Pepper, he does an inside loop. This is where the plane comes in and flies around in a complete circle with the head, the pilot's head is pointing inside the circle. And he does an inside loop, very impressive. And then he's going to fly the outside loop. Now, this is much more dangerous. Pilots have died trying the outside loop. This is flying the same loop, but with the pilot's head pointing out. And there up in the sky, I see this biplane. And it's Frank Tallman, the stunt pilot who did the stunt in the movie. And he's flying overhead and he does all sorts of twirls and spins and then he dives down at the stadium upside down. And he does the outside loop and this crowded stadium bursts into applause and cheers. This is phenomenal. And I'm thinking the promoter is crazy. This is better than the county fair, but he's setting us up for failure because, you know, you just can't have one great thing after another. You should save it. And then the first opening act comes on. The first band comes on. It's a local band. I have no idea who they were, but they were good. And I'm thinking again, promoter is crazy. Well, Bobby Womack comes on, a bona fide big name in rock and roll, and he is terrific. And I'm thinking, nobody's going to want to follow that act. The promoter is crazy. He's setting us up for disappointment. And then the Outlaws come on. Well, nobody had ever heard of the Outlaws. Their album had just come out a few weeks ago, a few weeks prior to this concert. And they come on and they are just incredible. Nobody can follow that act. It's just, I've had enough. This has been great. I say, Rob, thanks for forcing me to come along. It's 9 o'clock. It's getting dark. This is early August. I'm going to go home. And he looks at me like I'm insane. And then I notice the lights go on the stage. It's kind of dark now. And I hadn't really paid attention to the stage before, but here it is. It's huge. It takes up the whole width of this football stadium. And there are towers on each side covered with this fabric. And it's all lit up. And the fabric is glowing and shimmering in this light. And then I see one little guy come out from behind the stage. And he's carrying a flagpole with this long streaming banner, maybe 30, 40 feet behind him. And he is swirling this banner around and running across the stage, one end to the other, and leaping and twirling and swirling. And Rob yells into my ear, Mick Jagger. And this tiny little guy on this huge stage, well, this stage wasn't big enough for him. He owns the stage. He owns the stadium. This guy doesn't know what it means to be reserved or restrained. He doesn't know humility. He is everything. He is energy. He is confidence. And I'm watching him. I am just amazed. And then the band suddenly appears on the stage as if by magic. I was so intent on following Mick Jagger. I didn't see them come onto the stage, and they start playing. And for the next 2 hours, it's nonstop, song after song. The 72,000 people are on their feet, singing and cheering and applauding. And then it's over. And nobody wants it to end. I don't want it to end. It was magic. And we don't want it to end, but nobody, nothing could follow that act. And that's how I'm feeling right now. Like I've got to follow the Rolling Stones. So I had a great time, and I hope you all enjoyed these stories as much as I did.
Oh, yay. Oh, great.
A storyteller's storyteller. That's who you are, Sandy.
Oh, Sandy, you really tied this program up in a ribbon. No, in a big waving banner back and forth across our screen.
That was awesome.
Oh, man.
Oh.
Well, they weren't guys, so.
Lordy, Lordy, Miss Morty.
Okay, well, we'll have an after show for the Rolling Stones reminiscences. Well, we'd like to thank all our tellers for all of their magical stories.
You all rock!
And we'd like to thank all of our audience members. For joining us.
Audience. Thank you.
You guys rock too.
In this time of separation, we are glad we came together.